Hi, and welcome to the Friday Hangout, the show where we talk to the fascinating people we find fascinating and talk about the digital marketing issues that intrigued us this week. I'm actually really honored to welcome Margaret Malloy. She's the worldwide CMO for Siegel and Gale, and I had the chance. Margaret and I are connected through. I do a thing with the Brand Forum, Silicon Valley Brand Forum. Siegel and Gale has actually been a sponsor for years, so we have a connection there. But she and I had the first chance to chat just about 2 weeks ago, and God love her, she's a marketing nerd too. We just geeked out for like, I don't know, a half hour for very limited time. So Margaret, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, good afternoon, Steve. Lovely to be with you, and finally to be on the Friday Hangout.
Well, we're honored to have you. We know how little time you have showing the big kids how to do brand strategy right. Let me introduce my cohorts here and co-hosts. The effervescent Janet Fouts.
Fizzy in here, present.
And the ever delightful and charming Adam Hellway.
I like your term cohorts instead of cohorts. That's so endearing, Steve.
I thought it was. I thought it was. It's very, very touching. Margaret, I gave you just a really kind of high-level pitch, but it's really worth kind of talking. You've had quite an incredible career, and would love for you just to take just a few seconds to kind of like talk about some of the brushstrokes of that career and what you actually do for Siegel and Gale. A little about Siegel and Gale for those who may not know it.
Thank you for that opportunity, Steve. I run global marketing and business development for the firm. We're a strategic branding firm with offices worldwide, and we help clients define their brand through the lens of simplicity. Personally, I've been with the agency a year. I have spent most of my 20-year career client side, where I've worked at technology companies, helping them understand and supporting their initiatives around demand generation, particularly in B2B marketing.
And that's quite something. Now, one of the things that the Silicon Valley Brand Forum has really enjoyed is you guys have just an incredible wealth. We've had a number of people from Siegel and Gale speak. Other than giving us, because the Brand Forum, for anybody who doesn't know, is actually a grassroots organization, it's not for profit. We can't even charge enough to cover the cost of running an all-volunteer organization. So it's like Siegel and Gale makes that possible. But the other thing that they brought is all these incredible people and this talent. I've never ceased amazed that the people you guys offered to bring. I mean, people who talk about visual identity and storytelling, understand brand strategy, and you guys just are chock full of stuff. I would really be kind of curious, like, when we think about kind of branding, I'd love to kind of take it back a little bit, talk about maybe personal branding and kind of all that stuff. You guys do a good job of your own personal branding, I think. But for senior executives in the age of social, can you talk about what executives need to be thinking about in terms of their own branding, their own social media?
Certainly. From my perspective, it's important for each of us as professionals to think about what we represent. What sets us apart professionally and personally, and then the channels we use to communicate that. I think in the context of the role as a senior executive of a firm, particularly as a marketer, you have an obligation to be present where the market is and where your audience is, representing yourself as an ambassador of your firm. And the joy in this era is there are so many wonderful tools in the social media realm that allow you to do that at scale. So when I began my career, our constraint was the number of conferences or perhaps the number of publications where one might get a byline article. Well, the gorgeous phenomena that has changed is that with properties like LinkedIn and Twitter, we have that wonderful ability to project our brands to audiences around the world, and in so doing represent ourselves and our firms.
Well, in terms of personal branding, this has people. One of the things I get executives talk about is they go, I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about the company, and they don't understand it is about them and the company together. Can you talk about that just for a moment?
I share your perspective. I don't see that dichotomy. In the world where we live today, we are all a touch point for our companies. Whether we are the customer service representative, the sales clerk, or the executive. So I believe that's a false dichotomy that comes from an era where there wasn't that transparency that is now required by consumers and other constituents like future employees. So to summarize that analysis, I challenge the premise of their pushback to you. Secondly, I would say it's their duty, particularly senior executives on the marketing realm. Part of your job is to represent your company in a public setting. The other component to the discussion is it really works. It's a high impact strategy because as an executive, you want to project a point of view to your customers, but you also want to be a compelling, modern employer. And one of the things that separates successful companies from those who don't perform as well in this era is their ability to attract top-notch talent. The best talent want to work for modern managers, modern bosses. So if you are not modern, particularly as a marketer, you're not an attractive manager. And if you're not an attractive manager, you're doing your company a disservice.
I think that's something that a lot of corporations overlook, is that if you're really attracting top people, they come with a brand and they have their own brand established. They're professionals, they're leaders in their field, and they're really, very well known, and that's part of their value. So it's an interesting issue for a lot of companies that, how do they compete with that, or do they compete with that, and how can that manager or CXO keep their brand and the companies intact and let them complement each other?
I think your premise is sound, that the opportunity is to complement each other. I think there are mechanisms by which that can happen. It cannot be an organic thing. The first component is the brand of the company. What are the values of the company? What is the purpose? What is the promise? What is the voice of the company? So once you're clear as an employer what your strategic platform is, that should serve as a filter to make sure that the people you attract and hire are in line with that brand. So that's the first part, Janet. The second part, in my view, isn't about creating very strict rules, but rather guidelines that empower the employees, particularly at the senior level, the types of folk that you're talking about, to be able to have a brand platform that can coexist in concert with the company. And the third aspect that helps to ensure smooth execution of that is excellent training, and making sure that you're constantly reinforcing your brand, your voice, your promise, and your values such that employees know how to act on brand.
Oh golly, so CXOs actually need to set the stage for the rest of the team so that they all say, look, this is how she's doing it. We should do it that way too.
I think you're right, Janet. I mean, we can be flip about it, but the basic point is you have to model the behavior. And I think in order to model the behavior, you must, as an individual, know what you stand for as a brand. So there's some burden on the employees to have some introspection before they select an employer, to know it's a two-way street.
And but what about when that person has a deeper part of their personal brand? Say they have nonprofit charities or other interests that may not conflict with the brand but don't necessarily align with the brand. What do they do with that?
I think there are two parts to it. The first part is before that person elects to join that company, they must make peace with it and see if they're, so meaning that they're not in conflict, that they can coexist. The other aspect of it is, I believe increasingly our constituents, meaning customers, future employees, stakeholders, appreciate that a brand as an entity and also as an individual has dimension. So it's okay to like cats and still work at a tech company. Dimension is attractive. It's okay to have a nuance once it's handled in a professional manner if you are communicating as a representative of your firm.
Margaret, so I'll want to go down a little bit of a different but related path. So, um, brand management came about when things were more sort of linear and organized in regards to your organization structure. Now things are a bit more organic and fluid and sort of ever changing. The company with all the employees and people involved is a little bit more transparently seen as an organism nowadays due to social. So how can CMOs now? How do they need to rethink their management style or their organizational style due to this change of how everything has become much more fluid and organic?
So I believe much has changed, but much has stayed the same. So I would say, Adam, they still have to know what the company stands for. That hasn't changed. That has arguably taken on more importance than ever before. So knowing your purpose, for example, at Siegel & Gale, our purpose is to unlock simplicity in order to help organizations realize their potential. So you must know your purpose. You must then know your values, what you stand for. In our case, our values are smart, nice, and unstoppable. Then you must know your promise. What is it that you are pledging to the world? In our case, we are the Simplicity Company. We promise that our clients will be helped to unlock experiences for their customers that are remarkably clear and unexpectedly fresh. They must then know what their voice is. What is the tonality, both the visual identity and the words with which they speak to the community? Our tone is succinct, humorous, witty, and human. And then finally, they must know what are the brand experiences at those 0 moments of truth that they want their customers and constituents to have. So that framework, Adam, of having to appreciate what is your purpose, what is your promise, what are your values, what is your voice, and what are the experiences, that has to be a foundation. Beyond that,
I was going to just to sort of riff off of that. It's very interesting how rather than say rules or guidelines, everything that you just mentioned for you guys in particular was very loose and allowed people to sort of take from that and express it in their own way without sort of dictating exactly the rails that they need to stay within. That's very sort of I mean, that's the essence of brand, right? A brand is not, we're creating these boundaries. You must fit within these boundaries. It's really, a brand is really an organic thing that has to do with almost a partially an emotional and mental dialogue between you and another party, whether it be the external customers, which is what you're talking about there with trying to establish this brand experience and saying, what is the experience we want to have, where we want our customers to have, when they connect with us with some sort of touch point, and how can we guide that? I've always thought of a brand as a bit like water. Water is very forceful and it goes in its own direction, and it can definitely sort of push through and erode the shores or anything if there are too many bends. And we don't necessarily control water as much as guide water to do what it is that we want it to do and allow it to sort of flow in the direction that it does. And so that's what I was sort of getting from you. I really want people to sort of appreciate that you're not saying set these 3 rules, everybody follows these rules. This is our framework, and we want to equip everybody to sort of express this in the proper fashion as sort of this organism that we all are together, a living, breathing entity that deals with customers. I kind of maybe went the long route with that, but sorry.
No, I think your analysis is certainly interesting. From our perspective, though, you need that clarity. So for us, it's that intersection of clarity and surprise. We call that simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see that, it's a very beautiful thing. The challenge is it's not simple. To articulate a beautiful purpose and an elegant promise and to live that every day is a very audible, very desirable goal, but it's not simple. And the art and the science that my colleagues over the years have developed is a capacity to get to that essence. Now, living that promise, which our clients do on a daily basis when we work with them to articulate a promise, requires that mission and that everyone in an organization lives it. And a big part of that starts with HR. And I think that's often misunderstood. HR is such an important dimension because their ability to filter the right people that fit with that organization has infinite power to affect the business performance of the firm.
Very cool.
So one of the things, I mean, I think in this day and age, Tom Fromsky, I think, intelligently said like 5 years ago now, every company is a media company, and I think that's so true. And so, you know, and I know, so content marketing, while it's, I think it's kind of on the backside of the kind of the hype cycle now, content marketing has been here before in different other firms. I'm glad that it got some focus. I don't think people need to grasp it. But one of the things is it's a driving issue and brand managers have been trying to kind of grapple with is content's effect on the brand. And I was hoping you could talk about how content can help evolve a brand.
I think content is very, very important. Content has always been important. The change is the democratization of the platforms, and as we know, everyone can be a content creator. But all content is not created equal. Wonderful content has to be rooted in what does the brand stand for, once again, and gorgeous storytelling. And those skills are what discern great content creators and what separates brands who do content well from those who are just doing content. At Siegel & Gale, we do a lot of content because we are a firm, as you identified, that has a point of view. And the three channels that I share with my colleagues when we think about content are the following. I suggest that we need to think like scientists, which means have a hypothesis regarding what the audience wants, test that hypothesis, and constantly measure. I also suggest that we need to think like journalists. And the magic of journalists is they see content in places where others may just see stuff. So thinking like a journalist enables you to tell a story with a beautiful arc. And finally, guide like a consultant. In our business, we deal with very busy clients. So it's important that the information we provide as content is actionable. It's useful information they can do to do their jobs better, our marketing clients. 5 tips on how to do better naming. 5 gotchas in proofreading. Very practical things. The second dimension to the consultant is the ability to take content and modularize it. So present it as an infographic, present it as long form, present as short form. So when we think about content and when I try to inspire my coworkers to embrace content marketing, I ask them to channel the journalist, the scientist, and the consultant.
So I love that. You've been doing an incredible job at simplifying things as we talk about all these different concepts. Now I know why Steve wanted to have you on the show. So now we have the content, we have the great team, the folks that are part of this brand. How do we amplify or leverage the two together? How do we make the world a better place or extend that brand now that we've got both of those things up and running?
So I think an important part is not to lose sight of your customer. Constantly be your customer, the buyer of your services, your stakeholders from a Wall Street perspective or prospective employees. Constantly testing and appreciating what drives preference with your audience. Measuring that. Benchmarking it against yourself, others in your category, and best of class. So that's at the macro level what's important, Adam. But at a fundamental perspective, it's about mindset. Having that mindset that we are here to serve customers and to provide value. And understanding that as a goal then informs your filtration of which content is useful, that it's not just gratuitous stuff that you're doing for yourself, but rather it's really serving your customers. And if everyone is on board with that same agenda, then you arrive at a better place.
So let's expand on that a little bit more as how you measure the success of that. And storytelling in particular is very hard to measure the success of necessarily and define it to a product, because storytelling isn't always about that end goal of the sale. It's more about building the brand and expanding on that. So can you give us a little bit of information about how you track that and measurement?
So everything in measurement boils down to 3 large categories. And then it's the detail in between that gets complicated. But the starting point is everything has to do one of 3 things: increase revenue, reduce cost, or enhance quality of experience. So that's the framework that you have to start from. Now, the nuance will depend on each platform. So are we looking at levels of engagement in social? Are we looking at share of wallet? Are we looking at preference? There are many tools and methodologies to get you to that based on which aspect of a story you're trying to get right. But in my experience, Janet, the problem people have is they don't elevate it to those 3 things. Is it driving revenue, reducing cost, or enhancing quality?
Go ahead, please. Sorry.
I would addend it by saying in our situation, the other dimension beyond we look at is simplicity. And how do you measure simplicity? And we've spent many years with many thousands of consumers and the general public, as well as business decision makers, answering that. And what we've learned is people are willing to pay more for simpler experiences. People are more likely to recommend brands that offer simpler experiences. And when we tracked it, the stock performance of companies over the past 5 years who, according to the public, have offered simpler experiences on any index has outperformed significantly the performance of those who have not offered simpler experiences.
I think it's interesting, Margaret, because as I've been listening, this is the word simple or simplicity has been a theme throughout much of what you guys have talked about. So I assume, obviously based on, like you just said, there was a lot of research, there's some metrics you've tracked and all that sort of thing. It really is a core part of what you do. And I think, in my opinion, simple sounds like an easy thing to try to accomplish, and it's not. It's actually extremely unintuitive for most people. They know when they're using something that it feels simple, but they're not necessarily able to articulate why it feels simple. And I think the brands that are able to utilize that, I mean, in all honesty, I mean, one that always comes to mind is somebody like Apple, right? They've done a very, very good job of always really hunkering down on what it means to create a product that is simple, and one of the associations with their brand is when you turn it on, it just works. In comparison to some of the other technology companies, and so I think it's sort of an ultimate thing to achieve. It's much harder for most people to do so, and I think there's a lot of, like you just said, there's a lot of sort of brand equity and overall hard value, real actual revenue related value in going after simplicity, and it's very much associated not just with their product or service, but what becomes part of their brand equity, right?
That's been our experience, and some people will believe intuitively that it's desirable to be simple. But we found over the years that we wanted to have an empirical basis for that assertion, and that's why we've been doing studies that says not only is it interesting and desirable, it actually impacts the bottom line.
Do you make any of that information available by any chance? I mean, I think that's very interesting for us, I think, as the host, but also for our listeners. I think it would be interesting. Sometimes people share,
Yeah, certainly. Well, what we'll do is straight after this, we will tweet out the study. But the study is the Global Brand Simplicity Index. And we have looked at hundreds of brands across the world, 10,000 plus consumers have taken the study and responded, and it's a ranking of brands according to our metrics. But as I say, the key thing is consumers are willing to pay more for simpler experiences.
And we'll make sure that that link is also on the website too.
I just shared that in the chat too, by the way.
And one of the things that's interesting is I actually, a number of years ago, there was another company that actually tracked brands, and companies that were fundamentally described as being better branded did far outstrip the market. So there's a body of evidence at this point that shows that. And I think that a lot of neuroscience shows, I think why that is, the neuroscience data shows that the brain actually doesn't like to learn new things. We spend our brain, there are a lot of reasons for this, but our brains, it takes a lot of energy for our brains to encode new information. So we are more inclined to take simpler things. That's why it really pays off to do that. But I think it's worth kind of going into the kind of one more level down here. Is kind of we get near the end of our time. Is that a lot of companies have more of a traditional model, more of a the old style traditional marketing, and there are places for traditional marketing, but new marketing is a lot less of the black arts, and we have all these new ways of doing it, and companies can be slow to change, and change really has to come from the top. So if you're talking to a CMO who comes from a company that's still kind of entrenched in traditional marketing, what kind of advice can you give them in terms of what they can be doing and how they can help bring employees, the rank and file and everybody around them along on this path to modern marketing to embrace those things? What kind of advice would you share?
That always makes for a robust conversation, for sure. So I'll throw out some of the dimensions of that conversation. I ask them to think about two things. First is mindset, which I touched on a moment ago, and the second is building muscle. So the mindset requires a certain amount of evangelism and shifting their mental model to a world where we're not in a broadcast situation, where there's a two-way dialogue between constituents, and in fact many noded network of constituents and the firm. Personally, switching their mindset to participating in social media themselves and modeling the behavior they want from their organization. Part of the mindset, too, comes with patience. And many of us who have been successful in marketing have not the best of patience, but building some patience. So that's the mindset. Then the muscle memory is a different thing. That's about trying to create habits that are become repeatable, both on a personal level, whether it's doing social media yourself or creating routines in your organization, like the kind of effort that you're engaging at a firm level, bring a CMO from another company in every week and learn what he or she is doing. Routinize that to make it part of the muscle memory. Evangelism, training, understanding they don't have to invent it all themselves in their category, appreciating that you can learn from other categories. If you're in one vertical, another vertical may have encountered the same problem earlier. Learning from others. There's many dimensions to affecting change, but of course, as you can expect from me, Steve, I will always come back to keeping it simple. Because when you're trying to affect change, if you try to bite everything off and if you can't get to the simple drivers, then you end up with a mess.
I have to say that when I talk with CMOs like yourself, which it's interesting that the CMOs that I know that I'm interested in talking to tend to gravitate to the other CMOs I talk to, and it's an interesting process. And so I get questions sometimes from so when I talk to those CMOs, none of the CMOs ever say, Steve, how do we move to become modern marketing? Because they're already doing that, and they tend to be doing it. They live it, and quite frankly, it's hard. You need to have employees who are running to you, not that you're dragging along. We don't have time. It's just people who are dragging their feet are not going to change, and they need to find a place that's less challenging and outside the organization. When I get questions, I do get that question a lot, like through Twitter. People go, how do I get my bosses to grasp kind of the new things and adopt test these new things? They don't have to believe it. How do I get them to test these things? It's like, you should probably look for a new job.
I think there's probably something to that. And I mean, the other softer approach is piloting. Piloting can be a very safe and acceptable word. So sometimes it's how you frame something. Over the years, I've learned that from a career perspective and a professional perspective, often being right is not enough. It's being able to affect change through others. So
if only being right was enough.
Yeah, that's I say it again, Margaret. I think that's really brilliant.
Unfortunately, it took me many years to get there, but appreciating that it's not enough to be right, you have to persuade others. And as marketers, those of us who are good at marketing, if nothing else, we know the art of persuasion.
I would
go back to that.
I think that's so true, and I think that's a great place for us to end our time here today. Margaret, thank you so much. There actually, in part of our conversation, you shared several great articles that you wrote or were quoted in, and I'm going to actually make sure that those get added to our Friday Hangout. I really encourage people to read some of your work. I think it's worth their time. If people want to find you and follow you, where can they learn more about you and connect with you?
I'd be honored if folks would follow me at Margaret Malloy on Twitter. You can also find me on LinkedIn and many other platforms. I invite the engagement and thank you for the opportunity.
Hey, Margaret, I wanted to chime in and say we haven't had the show on for about a month or so, and so we're banging off the rust a little bit and coming back and having you on. And this is one of the few shows that I think, in my opinion, I need to go back and also rewatch again because of all of the great stuff that you said. I really appreciate you being on the show and getting us kicked back into our regular routine on Fridays with such great insights. So thank you.
My pleasure, Adam.
And I'll third that. We've added the link to the PDF on the Google Plus page, and we'll also make sure that it's on the Hangout website as well.
Thank you, Janet.
And so, Janet, if people want to find you, where can they find you?
You can find me anywhere at jfouts on Twitter, or you can find my blog at janetfouts.com.
And Adam, how about yourself?
You can find me at Secret Sushi most anywhere, or Adam Helway most anywhere as well.
And if you have trouble sleeping at night, you can look me up at Steveology on Twitter or my blog at stevefarnsworth.wordpress.com. We love your faces. You can catch us.
Where can they find the show, Steve?
I was just going to do that, but thanks.
Okay, just making sure. You said we love your faces, and I'm like, oh, that's the sign-off.
No, we love your faces, and you can find us. Actually, you can watch the show every Friday at thefridayhangout.com. You can catch it on YouTube. You can watch it, or I guess you can listen to it on Spreaker, subscribe via iTunes, or on iHeartRadio. And now, and actually this is the first time I should announce at the top of the show, we now have, through the incredible financing and high production values that we hold here at the show, we now have the FridayHangout.com app, both for iOS and Android.
Oh, that's right.
So big stuff. So please check us out. Download us at your favorite Play or Apple store. It's the Friday Hangout.
They're both on the homepage of thefridayhangout.com. You can find the links to the Android or the iPhone app there. And we've heard from Frank Strong that he's been listening to it quite a lot, and he likes the app. So we got our first reviews.
We love Frank. So
we do.
And he's a big Marine, so I say it with all due respect, dude. So anyway, thank you so much. We will see you next week, and until then, be good.
Take care.
Wonderful to have you on the show, Margaret. Thank you.
Thank you.